evening, ladies and gentlemen. May I have your attention, please? And welcome to the February 15th regular meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nation and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. The first item I have tonight is the adoption of the minutes of February the 1st. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Are there any moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Beale? Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. And I also need an approval of tonight's agenda. I have a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Beale, seconded by Councillor Greer. Any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Thank you. Well, we have a very important presentation tonight, and I'm going to take my time a little bit because this presentation is in honor of Chief Banks, who's been with the fire department for 45 years, and I now know that he wasn't always honest with me when he talked about his age, because he told me up to about 3 months ago that he was only 52 years old, and I know for a fact that you didn't join the fire department when you were 7. All kidding aside, it's my pleasure to recognize Fire Chief Doug Banks for 45 years of service with the Parksville Volunteer Fire Department. On February 15th, 1971, at the young age of 16 years, Doug joined the Parksville Department. Today, the department considers this to be a junior member. As a third-generation Parksville firefighter, long-term service obviously runs in the Banks family. In fact, since 1942, even I wasn't born at that time, someone from Doug's family has been a member of the department. Doug's grandfather, Bill Banks, was one of the first fire chiefs in the village of Parksville, and his father, Rod Banks, also served 45 years with the Parksville Fire Department. Although both Doug and his father served 45 years, we all must admit that 45 years really is a rare achievement. Chief Banks' service of 45 years has been exemplary, other than the fact that a certain hockey team that he favors is not quite so. But with this, I digress, and I apologize to Doug Banks for that. Similar to many other career firefighters, he worked his way up through the ranks. In the early 80s, he became an officer, and for 3 years was department training officer. In 1989, Doug was promoted to the volunteer fire chief, and in 1992, they figured out he could do a good job, and the position became full-time, with Doug as the first full-time employee of the Parksville Volunteer Fire Department. He has been active locally, regionally, and provincially in such organizations as the Fire Chiefs Association of BC, the Fire Prevention Officers Association of BC, the BC Fire Training Officers Association, as well as the provincial, regional, and local emergency programs. Doug, regretfully, speaking personally for myself, retires at the end of February of this year, and he'll be greatly missed by many of us. Congratulations, Chief Banks, on your 45 years of exemplary service with the Fire Department of Parksville, and this council and the City of Parksville. Thank you very much for your 45 years of service. Now that we've embarrassed Chief Banks sufficiently, I have a presentation to make on a certificate of recognition, and we're going to need to get all of you good men and women down here into a position where we can take some pictures. So, Chief Banks, if you want to. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are remaining, my goodness, the crowd's gone. Okay. We're now moving on to delegations as part of the regular order of the council meeting. And we have two delegations tonight. Our first presenter is Mr. Robert Shirkey. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Is the founder and executive director of the environmental nonprofit organization Our Horizon. In addition to Mr. Shirkey's delegation to council this evening, the city and the Mid-Vancouver Island Habitat Enhancement Society will host a talk by Mr. Shirkey this week, and that is this coming Wednesday night, February the 17th, here in the Forum. And I gather that starts at 7 o'clock? 7 o'clock. So more information is available for those who want to take up some information at the table by the door. So welcome, Mr. Shirkey, and you now have the floor. And the microphone, just press the button to turn the microphone on. And you have up to 10 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor and councillors, for having me, and thank you, staff, for extending an invitation to be here. I'm just going to load this thing up. I think we're good to go. So my name is Rob. I actually lived on Vancouver Island for a period. I went to law school at UVic, so it's nice to be back. But I'm now back home in Toronto, and I run this climate change nonprofit advocacy group. The concept is very simple. It's just climate change and air pollution. Call them information labels, risk disclosure labels, consumer advisories on gas pump nozzles. And you could think of it, more holistically where it fits is we're learning more and more that we need to transition to a sustainable future, so one that involves renewable energy, uses fossil fuels more conservatively, or doesn't use fossil fuels at all, and so on. But there's still a lot of systemic inertia just to the status quo. The incumbent fossil fuels, it's all that we've ever known and used, and it's completely normalized. So part of facilitating this transition to a more sustainable place involves having these solutions, but also involves challenging the status quo, disrupting it, causing a greater sense of dissatisfaction with it, and that sort of then facilitates this transition. Interestingly, so in Parksville, as you know, a good chunk of actually your greenhouse gas emissions do come from on-road transportation, roughly almost 2/3, not quite. And in terms of absolute emissions, from 2007 to 2010, there was actually a little bit of growth from that sort of piece of the pie. Something else that I found from your plan, Parksville, A Vision for a Future, about half of the people here the commute is less than 5 kilometers. So there's lots of opportunity there for change. These are mock-ups. You could think of these images. I'll maybe go on to the next one. Think of it more as a template where the top half of the label has an image, something to communicate climate impacts or impacts of air pollution. The bottom half, there it says warning. It could say notice, advisory, and so on, information. There would then be some text that corresponds with that, and there'd be a link to a website, a government website here, where it could be a page on your existing website where people can learn all the different ways to reduce their carbon footprint. And so the idea, I first launched it about 3 years ago. Since then, it's been endorsed by some of the top climate scientists in the world and a variety of leaders in their field from universities across North America. And I think that's because it actually addresses a lot of the problems of climate change. So first, I like to say that climate change can be understood as a problem of no feedback. And what I mean by that is there's a delay between cause and effect. So we burn fossil fuels today, the consequences of which aren't experienced until tomorrow. And in the absence of that feedback, and feedback, for those of you who are familiar with systems change, is a critical component, but in the absence of that, we fall prey to our cognitive biases, one of which psychologists they've identified as being the current moment bias, or hyperbolic discounting, and that's our tendency to prefer interests that are small and near in time relative to those that are significant but far down the road. It's sort of why we procrastinate. What this idea does, quite simply, is just through the use of image and text, is it brings that faraway consequence more into the here and now, so it sort of counteracts that current moment bias. It takes the problem of no feedback and it builds feedback. Climate change can also be understood as a problem of diffusion of responsibility. So what I mean by that is I contribute a little bit. All of us, each as individuals, contribute a bit to the problem. Of course, collectively, though, our actions are altering the chemistry of our planet. And social psychologists know that when responsibility for something is diffuse, so when it's shared among many, we're actually less likely to act. And there's research from a lot of realms that show that the fix to that is you have to sort of concentrate or locate responsibility. And what this concept does is the placement of the label on the gas pump nozzle takes a problem of diffuse origins, and quite literally it locates responsibility right in the palm of your hand. So again, it addresses this aspect of human nature, an aspect of climate change, in a simple, low-cost approach. And as simple as the idea is, I don't think there's anything out there quite like it that actually connects us to the impacts of our fossil fuel use in quite a direct way. So I do think it will be a compelling intervention. For those of you, and by the way, I dive into a lot of this stuff more, so I encourage you to come on Wednesday, but climate change can also be understood as a problem of externalities, sort of this issue of hidden costs, where we pay for, what it costs to get the product to market, but when we burn it, there's external costs. Fossil fuels leads to climate change, leads to extreme weather, there's health impacts and so on. That's not factored in the price of the product. Interventions like pricing mechanisms, cap and trade regimes, carbon tax, etc., they communicate those external costs in a quantitative way, so through the use of dollars and cents. What this idea does is it communicates to market hidden costs, but in a qualitative way, so the use of image and text. And there's research from behavioral economics that actually shows that this engages our sense of humanity in a much more compelling fashion than the sort of quantitative approach. So it's an interesting intervention in that respect as well. Marshall McLuhan, you'll remember him, a famous Canadian communications theorist. The medium is the message. People sometimes tell me, but I've already heard about this problem. I understand it. The interesting thing is the media through which we typically receive and consume this information, so film, television, newspapers, podcasts, and so on, just by virtue of that media, we consume that as passive observers. And what this idea does, the medium being the gas pump nozzle, you sort of become an active participant. So you may have consumed that information before through other media, but there's nothing quite like it that makes us feel connected to this problem. And again, from transitioning from passive observer to active participant is sort of a prerequisite for change. At its core, the idea is disruptive, and I'll dive into this a bit more on Wednesday. But in essence, on the demand side of the equation, what we have is a habitual automatic behavior. It's just part of the everyday fabric of living, completely normalized. And as long as that's the situation downstream, we sort of perpetuate the status quo. This idea disrupts that, causes a little bit of dissatisfaction with the existing solution, creates more space for change. And so you'll see, one, behavioral change, two, a shift in attitudes that I think will then result in business and government delivering solutions to meet that shift in demand. And I'll skip over that just because I know we're short on time. Where's that legislatively? So we have San Francisco, Berkeley, Santa Monica that are near the end of the legislative process. I'll show you, this is actually a draft ordinance from Berkeley that will appear on a version of the label. And Seattle, that was the last city hall there. They're sort of earlier in the process where they're still considering it. As you know, it was about a year ago, West Vancouver unanimously passed a resolution calling for labels on gas pumps across Canada. Youth across the country started to bring the idea forward, and resolutions have been passed coast to coast in favor of the concept. At the AVICC last year, it was in the spring, that received support, and then at the UBCM it received support as well. In November, a couple of months ago, North Vancouver became the first municipality in the world to pass the labels into law. Tofino and Port Moody have also directed staff to implement. And Mayor Masato said it's 2015 and we need to talk about how we're going to move forward as a society on a reduced carbon or carbon-free diet, and it's going to be a challenge. And this is sort of a piece that shines attention to that challenge. I'll end just on a quick story. The town of Hudson, the pesticide ban that many of us have on cosmetic pesticides on our front yards actually started in a town of 5,000 where just 3 councillors voted for it. Neighboring communities then decided to do the same thing. Eventually the province of Quebec stepped in, made it apply uniformly province-wide. Now something like 80% of Canadians live in a jurisdiction where there's either provincial law or a municipal bylaw that can be traced to the decision of just 3 people. And so I see this following a similar trajectory. And the game plan is actually to have it go global. I know I'm probably close to my 10 minutes now, so I'll maybe save some of these details for Wednesday. But what I will say is we've had Canadians from coast to coast who have been visiting government websites around the world, copying and pasting email addresses of politicians from C40 Compact of Mayors and Under 2 MOU. These are groups of subnational governments, cities, provinces, states that are really active on climate change, and they've also been getting email addresses of countries that have tobacco labels that are somewhat analogous to this. So in 2 months' time, we're shooting an email out to the world about this idea, and we're looking for more municipalities to get on board, either in a coordinated approach with neighboring communities or those who want to lead on their own. And sorry, that's definitely an overview, but please come on Wednesday, and I'm happy to answer questions.
It's a good reason to show up for your seminar on Wednesday night.
Wednesday night, yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to throw it open to council members for questions, and I see Councillor Greer, Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks, Mr. Shirkey, for coming and making your presentation. I can't support this for a couple of reasons. There are a number of reasons, but one is I don't think it's our position to tell private business what to do in their company. I'm sure if they were willing, they would do it themselves, but I don't think it's up to us to steer anything that might hinder their business down the future or right away. That's one reason. The other reason is that, as you know, the economy's in the tank, and there are many reasons for that as well. One being the oil situation, of course, but one other, and there are many, as I say, one other is the environmental movement has made it very difficult for companies and organizations to show a profit at this time. I think everybody wants to be environmentally friendly. I think all the companies are spending a huge amount of money on trying to be environmentally friendly. But I guess it's known that Canada only produces, what, 1.5% of the world carbon, and yet we seem to talk about more environmentalists and more restrictions all the time. So it seems to me, at this particular time, with the economy in the tank like it is, this does nothing really but hurt us. And I understand where you're going with it, and someday we will be there, no question about that. But at this particular time, I think it really hurts our economy. And as I say, I think most people want to be environmentally friendly, and most companies are, but it's costing them a fortune to do so. Mm-hmm. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Beale and Councillor Powell. And then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Shirkey, for coming in today. I just wanted to add that I had the opportunity to hear someone from the North Vancouver City Council just recently. I was over on the mainland last week, and I know that a concern that had been raised or speculated was a concern that the owners of the convenience stores would have some difficulty because they wanted to, that was where they placed advertising for their in-store specials. So I learned from the North Vancouver Council that in fact they have reached an agreement, and that was a concern that was raised, but that in fact the owners of the stores there's been a switch. They've come on board, and that they're working with the council to come up with solutions, and everybody seems to be working together so that this is in fact, well, as you know, it's already moved forward. So it was really nice to hear that with the will there's a way, mm-hmm. and they were able to come together, and I gather there's very little objection now, if any at all, to what they're doing there. So it's really encouraging to see.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much for your presentation. If you attended more than one Parksville City Council meeting, you know that Councillor Greer and I sit at opposite sides of the mayor for a reason. And, well, Councillor Greer says that it's not, this particular time is a bad time. I think it's actually the best time because the price of oil is crashing. It's time that we started to look entrepreneurial and deal with our environment. I think that we've come to a crossroads, mm-hmm. I believe, and we need to move forward. I think that solar energy, different types of energy, is more productive. There's more jobs that we produced in Canada than in the oil industry this year. And I'm not sure that Councillor Greer knows that information, so this is my way of informing him. So I support it.
Thank you.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you for your presentation. And like Councillor Powell, I do support a lot of your presentation. We don't even think nowadays of the warning labels on cigarettes, and that it was a short 14 years ago. We don't think about warning labels for drinking and pregnant women. I think that this is going to happen. I'm not sure how long a time period it will take, but like Councillor Powell said, we need to start looking at other opportunities, much like the solar, and look to the future for our children. So thank you for your presentation. I'm sorry I won't be able to attend on Wednesday. I have another meeting, but
It's okay.
thank you for coming.
Councillor Oates.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a question, more of a, I guess, logistics. These labels, how do they become, how do they remain relevant? Are you going to, require someone to put a label on there and that label stays there forever, or is it going to be changed up or something? Because if you look at something at the same time, after a while, it just becomes part of the landscape, and it becomes the intended effect is lost. So is the plan to have these labels rotated or refreshed on a regular basis?
Yeah, you're correct. So in the tobacco realm, the finding is they call it the exhaustion effect or adaptation effect, which you raised. And so the fix is essentially, they say every roughly 2 years, just refresh the labels, so come out with new designs. I think to the extent that this is fairly like a new intervention, I think it will have its impact, especially sort of in the broader context, as we do tend to upstream the problem. So every time we hear of climate change on the news, it's a problem of oil sands or pipelines or offshore drilling, offshore shipping, and so on. And I think that narrative, in part, it distances us from the problem and perhaps inadvertently perpetuates the status quo. So I think this idea, what it'll do, even though over time we'll sort of get used to it to a degree, I think it then forces this recognition downstream that we all use this product collectively. And on the innovation piece that sort of you spoke to, it's a bit cliche, but necessity being the mother of of invention, I think this idea it makes the problem that much more real, more tangible, creates that sense of necessity, and then hopefully it'll move our economy to a place where we're then developing the solutions that we get to export tomorrow and sort of get that lead, as opposed to, down the road exporting product that nobody wants, right, for having doubled down on something that's no longer going to be the future.
Thank you for the presentation. I think that the more we become aware of it, the more likely we are to come up with a solution. So I don't think we should continue to stick our head in the sand and say it's not a problem. So thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
I have a great deal of problem with this particular initiative, and I'll tell you why I feel like a hypocrite. Because I own an internal combustion engine car. It's what I can afford. And I will continue to drive an internal combustion engine car until either a hybrid or an electric car becomes more reasonably priced to suit my budget needs. So what do you say to somebody like me? Because I'm going to go to that pump and I can look at that thing till the cows come home, but I'm still going to be pumping gas into my car.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I'm in a similar situation. I mean, I flew to come here. There's a big carbon footprint there. At home, I get around. I'm fortunate enough that my commute is short, so I can walk to work. Sometimes I bike, I take transit. But I have a smart car as well, and while it's fuel efficient, it is an internal combustion engine vehicle. My thinking is, the more that, what this idea essentially does is it makes the problem real. It makes it tangible. It makes me a part of it. And I think if you can create this social environment where that's the case, we'll become more collectively dissatisfied with that status quo. And business then, there's then a market opportunity there. If I'm Ford, if I'm General Motors, and I see, look, we've been delivering the same old solution to market for 100 years. Here's this segment that's no longer satisfied with it. They're wanting something else. If we don't deliver to that need, our competitors will. So it can be a bit of a catalyst to get some innovation going. And, if you can signal to a producer the potential for economies of scale through broader demand, that's what actually then incents them to produce in volume to bring price points down to get the unit costs lower. So sometimes I hear people say, well, we need to have first better public transit and more bike lanes and more affordable electric vehicles and so on, and then put the labels. My thinking is it's precisely because there are so few alternatives that we actually need the labels now. And if you can stimulate that demand, then we'll see those solutions come to market. So I don't think, we shouldn't feel hypocritical. We're only here because this is where we are, It's just a series of events historically that brought us to this point in time. But as long as we've got that inertia of the status quo, we're running out of time to transition, So that, anyway.
When I look at a carton of cigarettes or a pack of cigarettes, it says smoking kills and lung cancer. And I had my mother died of cancer, and she was a big smoker. So I can relate to that because I know that if I stop smoking, which I did 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, I know that I have an impact, a direct impact on my long-term health. Have you, with regards to this movement, have there been any tangible results in terms of more people are buying electric cars, or more people are buying hybrids, or more people are driving less? Is there anything that you can report to us on that aspect?
Well,
because that's important. That would be important to me in this particular.
Yeah. At this point, it's a bit early. We don't yet have. It hasn't really been rolled out in sufficient ways so we can get that data. What I can say anecdotally is the response that I get is maybe fits in two general categories. And there have been some university students that have done surveys and stuff, and it seems to consistently be that for a segment of people, they then say, yeah, you know what, I've been meaning to read more books this year. Public transit where I live, it might take me 10 minutes longer to get to work, but I'm more open to doing that now. So you might get some people that do have that behavioral change. But overwhelmingly, it seems to be almost every single person that's exposed to this idea says, but we need more electric vehicles at a more affordable price point, but we need better public transit and so on. And my thinking is, if you can get everyone saying that, that's what's actually going to happen. I sometimes say, picture world A, world B, or city A, city B. One city has, it's the status quo. It's the thing we're trying to transition from is habit. There's all this inertia. And in the other community, in the other world, people are saying, well, this is what we need. We need more of this. So I tend to think in that latter place, solutions will come that much quicker to market. At this point, though, we just don't have the data to conclusively. I think, with the tobacco example, because places all over the world have implemented them, we now have data that shows that they do have an impact, but it won't be until this rolls out in a bigger way that we'll be able to get that data.
Would you suggest that if a motion were made to support this particular, we'll call it a climate change initiative, would it be appropriate as part of that motion to say that this is supported with the objective in mind of increasing the availability of public transit, increasing the affordability of to have some sort of focus on why people are doing that? Because frankly, putting a label on a gas pump, personally speaking, for me, I feel very hypocritical.
Yeah.
Because I know I'm going to be buying gas almost for the next 4 or 5 or 6 years until somebody comes up with something that I can afford.
Mm-hmm. And the nice thing is then in the interim, this is a bit of a nudge in a direction where you can, what it does is it creates dissonance sort of at this point of purchase, and you've got that week after week, that exposure. And through just with the design that we've created, I went to your website to look at some of the material that you have, and I learned a bit through that process. So imagine if you had, I think it's parksville.ca/whatever that page is, and then you've got, here's this transit app, or here's all the bike lanes. Did you know there's a provincial rebate for electric vehicles? Did you know it can even be broader than transportation. Maybe there's rebates available for home installation and that kind of a thing. I think what can I do now, that type of question, that it's a prompt then to go to that web page where there's all sorts of, even frankly, driving tips. Like with the vehicles that we have today, there are ways we can use them more efficiently. So at least, that would result in a measurable reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and there's a positive behavioral change there. And obviously the shift in attitudes that then enables these other sorts of reforms, that comes later. But yeah, so that would be useful to sort of pair it with existing initiatives and have it almost be a way to point to that.
Okay, I don't know, anybody else have any further questions? Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Has there been a survey done with the oil companies and the gas stations? Are they, I mean, it's contradictory of what they're doing. It looks like it's going to be difficult for them down the road. Are they in favor of all this?
Well, what's interesting is the mayor of West Vancouver, this is the first community that passed the resolution just calling for it nationally. He actually owns a bunch of gas stations, and he said, you know, I'll put them on my pumps voluntarily because he recognizes that oil in the oil and gas sector upstream, they are making progress on trying to reduce, you know, the amount of CO2 emissions per barrel extracted, right? There's only so much you can squeeze out of that. And I'll show you, actually, this is a really good slide. Yeah, if you look at this, so I'll just sort of take a second to situate it, but it will kind of answer your question in a way. This is what's called a well-to-wheel greenhouse gas emissions chart. So from well point of extraction and emissions associated with that to wheel, you know, point of use emissions associated with that. And they compare a variety of sources of fuels. So if you look at the oil sands and compare it to conventional crude, you've got a larger footprint upstream on oil sands. But if you look at this piece, you know, if you're, okay, so clearly the vast majority of emissions come from there. What is it? And you see it's vehicle operation. So there's only so much by way of efficiencies that you can extract upstream. The real opportunity for gain, and that's why it's kind of, for me, it's frustrating because if you think of our conversation nationally on the issue, it's always focused upstream, and yet the real opportunity for wins are downstream. So what the mayor said is he said, you know, this sector is doing as much as it can, but what this is it's just an information campaign. Like he described it as being fairly innocuous. To the point where he said, I'll voluntarily put it on my own things. So I think there's also, interestingly, I wrote a letter to the CEO, I can't remember his first name, something Williams from Suncor. I think they're vertically integrated with, I can't remember their retailer. Are they Petrocan? Suncor owns Petrocan? I can't remember. They're pretty vertically integrated with a retailer. And so I suggested, wouldn't it be interesting if, I mean, here you're getting all this flack upstream when the problem, if you're actually just looking at where greenhouse gas emissions come from, is downstream. Wouldn't it be interesting as sort of a consumer education piece to have this on your gas pump labels? I never heard back from them, but I have heard a few lawyers say it's in their best interest because they're going to be facing the sector litigation down the road, much in the same way the tobacco industry did with the, you know, when did you know this risk and when did you disclose it? And you could make the argument that it's in their best interest to have these labels in that they communicate risk. And, you know, when these sorts of people that run these businesses are testifying down the road as to the damages that, you know, the planet has sustained from burning fossil fuels, they'll be able to say, well, look, we communicated that risk to the end user. So it's interesting. Response from industry, I think in some ways you can actually say that this is to their benefit. It kind of mitigates future liability. And I think there's also an interesting PR piece where imagine if a retailer decided to lead with something like this. But yeah, I mean, it's just a sticker is how I sometimes say, like, it's pretty innocuous.
It's strange how in this day and age we have to litigate everything. And of course you're a lawyer, so you know all about that. So, you know, and I realize what happened with cigarettes and so on, but, you know, this country is a very small country, and we really rely on our natural resources. And I think at this particular time, as I said, the future is certainly going in that direction. I have no problem with that. But at this particular stage of the game, everybody's doing their best, and yet we're in the tank financially. I think you have to be a businessman to understand what happens with these things. Anyways, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, no further discussion at this time. Can we move on, or does anybody want to make a motion, or, pardon me? Okay. Yes, go ahead. We can wait for new business too.
Okay, I'll make the motion. And I think you had it on your the presentation to request council to consider greenhouse gas emissions information labeling on gas pumps.
Any comments on the motion? and I still feel like a hypocrite. Yes, Councillor Oates.
I don't know what the result of yes vote would be. If we voted yes for this, what would we be doing?
I
what
gather
would we be requiring the city of Parksville to do?
I gather we'd be writing to the oil companies to tell them to put these labels on their gas pumps in Parksville. Is that the case? No? I'm sorry, Mrs. Gomez.
Your Worship, this would have the effect of regulating business in the community, and so we would be required to prepare a bylaw to require this to be done, and it would have to be advertised in the local paper, and council would have to provide an opportunity for interested parties to be heard before it was adopted.
Councillor Beale.
If I can share what I learned from the presentation with North Vancouver, is what they did is they set about, they implemented this, met with businesses and so on, but then it became, with business license renewal, that is the time when this would then go into effect and would be on the gas pump labels. That was their experience, so it's something that's done at the municipal level with the business licenses or the businesses.
Our local gas companies, like we've got Chevron, we've got Shell, we've got Petro-Canada, I gather they have to, the local operators don't have the final say, do they? Does it have to go back to the headquarters of these companies before they can get the approval?
Yeah, well, I mean,
That's a question I don't know the answer. Do you know the answer, Councillor Oates?
I think what we're being requested to do is to institute a bylaw requiring businesses within the boundaries of the city of Parksville that retail fuel to have these labels on their gas pumps. And I think the motion is for staff to start crafting the bylaw. I just want clarity on what we're voting on. But that's what I understand the intent of the motion is to start crafting a bylaw that would require gas retailers, I presume just retailers, in the city of Parksville to have labels on their pumps.
I'll ask you the question then. What's been the reaction locally to the retailers? They just go ahead and do it if it's a bylaw?
So
has anybody gone to their corporate headquarters and the corporate headquarters said no?
So from my understanding, what happened in North Van is I guess I gather that they did consult, and there hasn't been any objection from what I understand. I mean, this would just be a bylaw that it makes these labels a condition of the license. I think in terms of due process, I mean, obviously retailers should be consulted and so on, but the point would be to sort of draft a bylaw, have staff come back with a report and recommendation. The other thing I might suggest that might be of value as well is I do know that there are some other communities on the island that are very interested in implementing, and I think there is some value, and this could be something that's maybe communicated to staff to sort of reach out to other municipalities, so there might be more of a coordinated approach for those who are interested. Just a suggestion, and I'd be happy to link you up with other communities that are also interested in this idea.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would be more than happy to change the motion to direct staff to consult with other Vancouver Island communities that are interested in this type of bylaw, and we shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel and then report back to council.
Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that? Okay, members of council, Councillor Greer.
Can we also add that we consult with the local gas companies? Because I think they're the ones that we're shooting at is the gas companies locally.
They would have to be consulted if council were to consider the bylaw.
Thank you.
Are we ready to call the question? I still feel like a hypocrite. All those in favor? Oh, that's unanimous. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor and Council. Thank you.
Our next delegation is someone we're all very familiar with. We see her every year. Thank God for Joanne Sales. Joanne, welcome. Broombusters is back for another broom busting year, and you have the floor, so go right ahead.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, it's always a pleasure to come here. Thank you very much for making time for us. I don't really need to start at the beginning about how bad Broom is, but I do it anyway. So I hope I do. There we go. Should I make a bigger screen than that, or is it? Anyway, so what I want to do is I want to talk about what Broombusters did in the past year and what we're hoping to do in the coming year. I do not have a watch, so somebody can give me a minute. Okay, so I'm going to kind of fly through some of these photos, but I think you all recognize that one as the entrance into Parksville. Okay, Broombusters started in 2006, and Parksville's been going since 2007. So it's been our relationship's been a long time, and we're feeling that it's really going to start taking off now. Scotch Broom quickly takes over the empty fields. You're familiar with this by Buckerfield. I think the interesting thing to note is that it hasn't changed. Since the Broom covered it, there are no trees growing there. That's what happens, since the trees do not regrow. People have come up to me, local residents, and said that they have been traveling to Spain, Portugal, Croatia, Brazil, Australia, and New Zealand, and the hills, the fields are covered with Broom. If you don't stop it anywhere in the world, it takes over. This is an item of serious concern, is that the Broom is being allowed to take over the power lines. When I start talking about fire hazard, you'll see why. But anyway, it's just really important to look at what is going under our power lines, okay, and to think about, okay, if it's a fire hazard, which it is, okay, and there was a fire somewhere, it could just go right down the power lines and destroy the electricity, but it would also go quickly from one place to the other and out of control. But let's just go plain old Broom. What's the matter with Broom? It's an alien invasive plant. Okay, forms dense thickets, crowds out native plants, loss of diversity, slows or prevents forest growth, causes allergies, highly flammable. Deer can't eat it, so they come to our yard. Okay, so I'm just going to, you've seen most of these before. This is how big the Broom is. It can get 15 feet tall in a very short period of time. Okay, we're going to be talking about vacant lots in Parksville, and Parksville has a bylaw, so we're really happy about that. Okay, here's on the right, this is a picture of the estuary. But now, you know, it's not like that anymore, but it's a constant battle in the estuary. Some places are easy, some places are not. Young people love to cut Broom. Okay, here's the fire hazard issue. Okay, this Broom looks like it's dead. It was not dead. Okay, this was a dry year. We're looking at drier summers. Okay, so, you know, people say, oh, the Broom is so beautiful, but this is what it looks like when it's dry. Okay, and you can imagine what a fire hazard that is. Both of those photos actually were in Qualicum Beach at the landfill. Doesn't look like that anymore. Here we are at Inland Island Highway. Okay, this is Broom on the banks. Once again, fire starting there. Okay. This was, I wrote drier wrong, by the way. I figured that one out after I sent it. Drier summers and drought conditions. Okay, here is a quote from the BC Wildfire Service. 2 invasive species cause fire behavior and control concerns, Broom and Gorse. Okay, this is the first time that I've seen it in writing, something that we have known all along, which is that Broom is a fire accelerator. The fire's going along like this. It hits the high oil content in the dryness of the Broom branches, and it explodes. It's like throwing kerosene on a fire. So our power line should have been a natural fire break, but instead it's increasing the fire hazard. Also, the way this affects Parksville specifically is that having Broom on the sides of the roads so I can bring the fire closer to our homes. Okay, what took place in Parksville in 2015? We're going to look at each of these pictures close up. Okay, so across from the Parksville Visitor Center. Okay, so you can't actually see the Broom in these photos, but in the woods that are right on the other side between Industrial Way and the Visitor Center, that area was taken over by Broom, and we've been chipping away at that for a long time. And actually, there used to be Broom in the field, but now it's pushed back. Oceanside Health Center and Wembley Mall. Okay, this was the end of the season, so you can't actually see so much of the Broom, but. And this young woman, the one standing to the front there, she works at the SOS, and she motivated the starting of having this broom cut there. It was really wonderful to watch her step out and email me and get it all started. And she was so happy when it succeeded. Okay, here's more volunteers at the Parksville Interchange. Okay, the Girl Guides did some serious cutting. You can see the water tower in the background, the train station. They had a wonderful time. Oceanside Elementary, here they are cutting broom. It says "Kids Cutting Broom." That's what the sign they made was. Here's some more pictures of that. And the education is really important, going into the schools and teaching the young people, and then they go home and they teach their parents. Okay, and then we've got the Gorse problem, which is a uniquely Parksville problem.
Excuse me, could you just substitute the word gorse for geese?
No, thank you. Here we were last year. Gorse is not really a plant that we're going after, but Parksville's been in a bad way with the gorse that took over in that big yellow field. And we're really glad that the bylaw was passed so that at least the owner had to start the cleanup. The problem, of course, is that gorse does not die when you cut it like broom does. Okay, so all we're really doing when we cut it is to try to stop the spread. But you can see in the next photo, all of this broom is way up by the the bumper cars or something like that. Anyways, past the resorts, the broom has traveled all the way up, almost to the Esso station in spots here and there. So we removed all the broom, and then all of a sudden it looks like the broom's still there, but it's not. It was all gorse. So all of these photos here are gorse in other places that we were trying to stop the spread, stop the seeds. This is all gorse. This is acres of gorse. This is, I guess, on the defense property or something. It looks like gorse looks like broom, blooms earlier and will not die from cutting. Okay, a few more photos, and then we'll talk about the specifics. Okay, these are just more volunteers here and there and everywhere. Okay, so you can see that this is Island Highway when we saw that it was broom. Okay, now all that we have left there is the gorse. Okay, so Parksville now has a bylaw prohibiting landowners from allowing invasive plants like Scotch broom from growing on private property. We thank you very much for that. As property owners learn about the bylaw, we hope that they will voluntarily remove the broom. We'll show them how, and that's what our intention is when somebody does have broom, we're going to say, hey, look, here is how you can successfully get rid of it. Here's the time of year to do it. Here's tools. What else do you need? Okay, so that we want to make it easy for them. Okay. If somebody on private property cannot remove it themselves, we'll go in and help. Okay, so ideas for participation. Parksville's been great about any time we cut broom, the broom disappears. We thank you for that. Signs are great. Anytime we can put signs up, it really informs the public and invites them to participate and to do their own work. Public statements are great. Drop zones are working well in Nanaimo to have just one day, or they've had several, but even just having one day where people can come and drop off their invasives, and the city then will dispose of them. And thank you, Parksville, for the bylaw. Nanaimo also has a bylaw. So far, that's the only cities that we know that do. Okay, so back to the gorse problem. We are hoping to continue to help. We know that there's not a great love of using herbicides for us or anyone. But here's a suggestion that we thought would help. We're going to try to keep helping as much as we can, but we're not going to be able to get rid of it. So this is what we might do that would actually get it under control and start killing the gorse. Okay, cut with a weed whacker. I don't know if a brush cutter, whatever it is, a spinning thing, close to the ground throughout the summer. Okay, most of it will die. If it's hot enough, you keep cutting it down to the ground, a lot of it will die. Cut it down to literally the ground so that nothing is showing. Okay, it'll come back up, okay, but when it's very tiny, it requires a very, like this high up, of course, it requires a very small amount of herbicides. That is not anything that we can do. But gorse is a noxious weed with the province, so I think it is a different category than one that is not. repeat the next year. Okay, hopefully the amount of property that has gorse on it will start to shrink rather than the other way around. And don't let any gorse go to seed in Parksville ever again, and require landowners to do the same thing. I think that the idea of cutting close to the ground is really essential, and that's where we would need to be asking the cooperation and the help of the city, because it would have to be a town worker that would continue to go after it. Okay, the reason why we cut Broom, future generations.
Well, thank you very, very much, and thank you for what you do in your group. I gather we don't have a bylaw for gorse, do we? Or is it just thrown in with the invasive?
It's a provincially designated noxious weed, so the provincial legislation takes care of it.
So we don't, so it just supersedes anything we can do. Okay, thank you. Members of council, questions for Ms. Sales? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. And so the field where it's all been cut down, the gorse, and there's big piles of dead gorse. Now, is that just going to go back to seed? That big lot?
The seed is in the ground.
Okay.
The problem with gorse and broom is that the seeds live for decades.
Okay.
So they will come up again. And they will come up in that big field, and I think it's really important for the city to keep going after the landowner and say you can't just cut it once and say it's gone, it's back again, because they also would have to treat it in the same way, just continuing to cut it down to nothing.
Follow-up question. So,
any further? Oh, I'm sorry, you finished?
No, follow-up. Okay. So through you to the director of planning, no, not director, the CAO. Sorry. Anyway, so because it's a provincial issue, would they be involved in monitoring, because it is within the city, but would the province be the people in charge of monitoring that landowner to keep applying and trying to get rid of that, or is that our responsibility?
Well, in a perfect world, the province would do it, but I don't think the province has the resources to go out and manage the noxious weeds. I mean, they provide them with the designation, and they prohibit people from growing them or allowing them to grow. But I think that if in reality, if we relied upon the province to enforce the provincial legislation, that it would be very little, very late.
Any further questions for Ms. Sales? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Joanne, for coming forward again. Is there a short period of time that the broom is in blossom that it should be cut?
Yes,
6 weeks?
We used to say end of April, all of May, a little bit of June. Last year, it was moved all the way up. We have to quit by the third week of May. So I would say we'd probably start the second week of April this year.
Okay. And do you have pamphlets or anything on the website that could be printed off for people to start getting involved earlier rather than when the broom is in bloom?
Yeah, we have plenty of things to hand out. We've got information, we've got posters, that we can put out. We're happy to supply it to anybody. I mean, like in the city, if there's more ways that we can access the community. I know that in Lanceville they have a newsletter that goes out, and so they include information in the newsletter so that people can start preparing. I don't know if Parksville has anything like a newsletter, do you? Okay, well that'd be wonderful for information to be in the newsletter.
It'll be out in the March edition.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor, anybody else? Councillor Beale? No? Councillor Beale.
Just briefly, thank you, Your Worship. That was actually going to be my question, if we can have that information as well going out from the city's website and newsletter. And I just want to thank you again for coming here. And I know that every year down in my neighborhood, we're not too far from the estuary, that it's a group of us that get organized. Thanks to you, we borrow some of your tools and go down and tackle regrowed areas in the estuary. And it's a fun event too, to get together. It can be very social, and it's really nice to see the progress that is made if we keep at it. So keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thanks again, Joanne. You great work, and we can't thank you enough for all the good work that you do. And Are you thinking about something along the lines of, you were talking about earlier in your presentation about a day where we sort of have a massive amount of people, you know, like a Saturday or a Sunday, everybody get out and...
Yeah, well, usually we do that. We have specific days. I think what would be a more effective way to do it would be to actually say, okay, publicize that, okay, May 2nd or something, you know, we're going to have a massive day in Parksville, you know, and have the city try to help promote it and have signs up and so on. I think that signs are okay as long as you have it with a specific day and not just sort of like cut Broom all this next month. So that is our hope of a new strategy, is to actually have specific times so that we can actually have signs up for, you know, telling what time it is. So when people come into town, they go, oh, okay, Saturday from 9 to 12. Okay, and then once people know how to do it, then they can go and do it any time. Like if they want to go down to the estuary, they can go any time that it's in Bloom, because they sign waiver forms, they're educated, they know how to get a weapon, sorry to call it. They know how to get a tool. So anyway, yes, it would be wonderful to be able to do that this year, to have a specific focus time.
Could you drop by to see me sometime and we can talk about it?
Yes, I'd love to do that.
Give me another week. I just got back, but maybe
Okay.
next week or the week after. Okay?
Okay.
Thanks very
Sure.
much.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
Okay, our first report of the evening is a 45-year report on the Volunteer Fire Department. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the Volunteer Fire Department annual report on 2015. Councillor, Chief Banks, I almost called you Councillor Banks. Go ahead and give us your report on 2015.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. This will be the last time you have to listen to me. Huh? Yeah. Yeah. As fire chief, you never know. No, it's been the last 45 years has been a pleasure. Well, I think 45 years ago at this time, I was going into the fire hall for my first fire practice with two other gentlemen. We joined at the same time. And if you would ask me then, are you going to be addressing council in 45 years? I would have told me you're probably nuts, but yeah. So it's been a fun career, and I appreciate the support that councils have provided myself and the fire department over the years. I've always said that we don't have everything we want, but we have everything that we need. And council has always been a really strong supporter of the fire department, and we truly appreciate it. So
You can blame Councillor Greer for that.
You have? Well, I can stop now? Oh, okay. I thought I'd just like to give council an update on the 2015 year. 2015, our incidents were up slightly over 2014. Over the past 10 years, it's been a general upward increase. There's been some dips and valleys, and why that is, I don't really have any idea. In 2015, we did 377 emergency calls, and another 132 incidents that were sort of non-emergency and some maintenance type issues. So, on average, incidents last about 55 minutes. So, this is kind of a breakdown of our calls that we have had over the last 5 years. Alarms calls have typically been the largest portion of our call volume. Over the last 5 years, they've been dropping. I think people are getting more used to the alarm systems, and we don't get as many as many alarms calls as we used to. although we have to treat those seriously because we've have had some where the alarms have actually saved a significant amount of property damage. Automatic aid calls, the next one here, has increased. We've had the automatic aid agreement in place now for 5 years, and it's starting to get, some of the criteria has expanded for some departments requesting automatic aid, ourselves included, for confirmed structure fires in non-hydranted areas. We have one 1,200-gallon tanker. That's nowhere near enough to keep up with a structure fire. So we're able to call on other departments. Arrington, Coombs, and Qualicum, for example, have larger tankers. So the call goes out automatically, and we can have lots of water there in short notice to help deal with the situation. Medical calls this year was our highest type of call volume. That's the first time that's happened. We did 83 medical calls last year. We looked at the stats from North Island 911. We were requested 978 times for first responder. And of those, we don't go to all, those are right from minor calls right up to the cardiac arrest that we were going to. If we made the decision to go to respond to Delta type calls, which is still as serious, they're more trauma calls and stuff like that, it would add 488 calls based on last year's stats to our incident volume, and that would not be sustainable for the volunteers to keep doing that. So, motor vehicle incidents is another big type of call, and I'm not going to touch on every one of these. I could talk forever on them. But motor vehicle incidents are one type that we respond to. And in a lot of cases, we don't page out a full crew to go to a motor vehicle incident. The duty officer goes out and deals with it. There was, 58 motor vehicle incidents that we went to. And in a lot of cases, it's a broken tail light or something like that, minor in nature, where we don't want to waste the resources of the volunteers that were here this evening. We want to keep them for the bigger calls and that. So, public service type calls, that's kind of a general where we don't know where to categorize it. Somebody's called and they have an issue, and we go deal with it. A leaking hot water tank that steam is coming out, and people don't know who to call. If it's not a medical call or if it's not police related, well, who do you call? You call the fire department. So those are quite a bit. Structure fires appear to be up significantly. But what we did this year, we've changed with the implementation of our new records management system. We changed how we categorized the calls. So we lumped several call types under structure, like if it's an electrical odor or smoke or industrial multifamily, that sort of thing. So we had 33 structure related calls. I think out of those we had about 8 where we actually had to pull hose line and the fire was into the structure. So they're all lumped together. So and that's sort of a rough breakdown of the call types. Natural gas breaks, we had a number of those, even after all the advertising on Dial Before You Dig and that. So but fortunately none of them were related. Of the structure fires, we keep track of dollar loss. In 2015, we had about $1 million of fire loss. Conversely, on the other side of the coin, it was about a $64 million fire saved, if you will. So one of those was a $50 million fire save. One of the schools, there was a fire in the school, and so it was worth $50 million. We thought we'd keep track of that, just for the fun. We just carried with our new records management system. It was easy to get out some reports. Just sort of the calls by time of day and day of the week. Fridays are actually our busiest day. Between 8 and 4 on Fridays, we had 41 incidents. So I don't know why Fridays are so busy, but just some interesting stats. And you can see between 8 and 4, our daytime between 8 and 4 seems to be our busiest call volume, and that's when we're relying on the volunteers to get away from work and that. So that's kind of critical for us, and that's probably going to be the tipping point of more staff. So we have full-time staff when the volunteers aren't available to show up. This is our busiest time with the least amount of availability for volunteers to respond. So our incidents by building class, 66% of our calls are residential structures. I think that's pretty in line with our building stock. We're mainly residential. 9% of our calls are in public assembly. Like restaurants, some commercial stuff and that. So 6% in mercantile occupancies. So just a breakdown of the different places that we're going to. Muster time is an important issue for us, and that is the time from when we get the page until the first truck is going out the door. For 2015, the engine is usually the first truck out the door. On average, it's out the door with a crew in 6 minutes, just over 6 minutes. So it's up a little bit. It bounces back and forth a little bit depending on where our members are living and that. We have some members that are pretty close in that. So that's any time of day or night. I haven't broke it down into the different time ranges and that. So this just shows the amount that our apparatus was used. Engine 41 and engine 42, we rotate those trucks around so they each get some use, equal use. So and in a lot of cases, like for alarms calls, we just run with a single engine. We don't have to chase everything down the road to it. So on average, we're the first engine is on scene in 10 minutes. And that's anywhere in our fire protection area. Obviously, closer to the hall we are, the quicker the truck is going to be there. It's simply a matter of driving time. The crew's assembled and out the door in 6 minutes, and then from there it's strictly driving time, how long it takes to get there. The ladder truck is usually the second truck out the door. And it's a bit bigger truck and a lot slower, so it takes a bit more time. So our membership, we have it's always in flux. Biggest portion of our membership is between 1 and 5 years experience. We're starting to build up again with some of the the 10 to 20 years, that's typically our officers. And, you know, the 20-year plus right now, that's just Mark and myself, so that number's going to change next year. We didn't have any recruits in 2014, so you know, it's changed this number a bit, and we did lose a few. So just some operational stuff, highlights from the year. We had the new recruit class start in May, and they're just completing. We implemented our new Fire Pro records management system. It takes a while to get everything converted over to it and that, so we've got it all switched over. With council support, we had the extreme weather duty crew on, and that was very valuable. We got a lot of stuff accomplished in that time. We promoted a couple new officers up to replace some people that had left, and unfortunately we lost one of our members. Mike was with us for 7 years. We lost him to cancer, and you know, he was a valued member of the department and is greatly missed. So some of the training, our training hours are up again. 2014, you've seen a bit of a drop, and that's because we didn't have the recruit class that we typically have. So training is probably, we spend twice as much time training as we do responding to incidents. It's just the nature, the way it is. You know, some of the highlights from the training, we were able to use the old Post and Lantern Inn. The developer was gracious enough to let us have it, partly because his son's in the fire department. So we got used to that building. We got lots of valuable training out of that. We switched our confined space technical rescue training over to another provider, and we had 8 people go through that. We started 6 recruits. 5 had no previous experience in that. So we did some hazmat training, which is an ongoing thing. We didn't do any initial first responder training last year because of no recruits, but we did recertify 8 members in hazmat training, and we did a strategies and tactics course for our company officers, all the officers and chief officers. We did some automatic mutual aid practices with our partners, which is very valuable. We do quarterly training days for all the officers. We bring them in, and we go over cover a lot of ground on those days, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. We had 4 members complete their EVO, fire service instructor level 1. We had 1 member complete his firefighter 2 certification. Some officer level 1 and 2, some people completed that. And we have in the fall, we implemented a daytime training session for guys to make up. So we're actually doing that on Fridays now, and it's working out well. So if any members miss something, we were able to, you know, help get them up to speed on stuff. So for 2016, the objectives for training is switching over our curriculum material to the Jones and Bartlett, which will work out good. It's a good resource material. Going to get all our training stuff finally completely switched over to the Fire Pro system. Working on the training tower, the capital project we have. Work on more company officer development, and do some interagency training with fire, police, and ambulance, because we work with them quite a bit. Our fire prevention program, we have 812 inspectable occupancies. You know, since 2007, we've increased 100 occupancies for inspection, And, you know, last year we were able to get 287 completed. A lot of that, I think, has to do with, you look back a few slides earlier, the number of calls that we have during the daytime, and that, so that pulls our inspector away from inspections, you know, so. Public education is a big thing for us, and this is where we utilize a lot of our volunteers to help with public education program. You know, if we can go out and prevent the fire from starting, then we've done our job. As Councillor Beal knows, we go to the schools quite a bit. Parksville Elementary was, I think we were another classroom for them because they were there out in our fire hall quite a bit. So we managed to do 28 public education programs throughout the year, and we reached over just about 800 participants from, and you can see the different age groups. There's probably one in there that didn't get added in, where I went did a talk with the Legion Auxiliary, their conference when they were here, and that was 300 and something women that were from the Ladies Auxiliary, and it was a fun talk. So, and this is just a breakdown again of by the age range. So, we, you know, unfortunately, we'd like to be a little more proactive in getting out to talk to groups and that, but you know, we're mainly reactive. So, it's when a group calls up, we're able to make arrangements and provide some public education for them. Our emergency program is going good. We're developing some more volunteers. We've been able to get some more volunteers involved with that, and the emergency program volunteers are. We do that regionally with the town of Qualicum Beach and the regional district of Nanaimo. So they service District 69. We conducted a successful emergency preparedness week expo in May. It was a 2-day event that we did that with the town of Qualicum Beach and the regional district, and we had one event here in Parksville at the community center and one at the civic center in Qualicum. And in the 2 days, we estimated we had over 1,000 people come through and pick up information on that. We did activate our ESS group and that when we had the fire, when the fire was in Coombs in July. Fortunately, we didn't have to evacuate anybody, but they were used 3 or 4 times throughout the year with smaller house fires. A level 1 response where a family, they didn't have insurance, or you know, they lost all their possessions. Our ESS group was able to come out and help those people. So, then we assisted with the regional district of Nanaimo did an exercise on the one weekend up in Coombs, and our groups were up there. Our communications group and our ESS volunteers were up there and were able to assist with that. So they were quite busy, and that it's coming along good. Having the volunteer coordinator position, the contract position in place, we're able to focus on the volunteers, and they can get out. And he's been a big help recruiting and retaining our volunteers. So, and that's a quick overview of 2015. So,
thank you, Chief Banks. And it's pretty obvious that the fire department over your tutelage has been in really good shape. That's all good information, and it's all we can see that it's progressing. I'm going to ask the first question. Before you leave, are you going to give us some recommendations that you see for the fire department? You know, nothing too lengthy, but a short recommendation as your departing words to the city.
guess my recommendation would be to continue with the support of the fire department that council, has provided in the past. Like I say, we don't have everything we want, but we have everything we need, and council has always been a big supporter of the fire service in Parksville, and just for that to continue is all we can ask for.
Yes, Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Chief Banks. I'm just curious, I've been noticing the great ads in the paper, volunteer recruiting. They really look great. Well done there, John. They looks good in that paper. I'm just wondering, has there been a positive response to the advertising for volunteers?
Yeah, Your Worship, through to Councillor Beal. Yeah, we've had a number of people come in to pick up applications, and I think we've got about 6 applications on file that been brought in right now. Tomorrow night, actually, we're going up to Bolinas. They're having I think it's like a career fair or something like that they're having up there. So we're going up there, and one of the things that we're looking at, we haven't had junior members for a while. We want to see if we can get some more juniors in, because it's a positive experience. We've had a number of junior members, starting at 16, like myself. The deputy chief starting when he was 16, and we've had a few others over the years that have joined, and it's been a positive experience for them. So if we can bring in some more juniors, would be good. So, but overall, we did the same sort of recruiting drive, and with the assistance of our communications officer, Debbie Tardif, it's been a big help getting the word out and that. So it's been worthwhile.
Anderson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Chief Banks, for your final presentation. I just have a quick kind of question, and I'm not really sure how to put it, but I sit on an accessibility as the liaison for the Access Oceanside Association, and a question was raised in regards to people that have an accessibility issue, and if there was a fire, do we have any stickers or anything that are available to say there may be someone that has accessibility issues in the house? Or do you know of residences, or could residences tell the fire department that there's someone with a wheelchair? Or I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, Your Worship, through to Councillor Patterson. We don't have any stickers that we put on windows. There's been some programs over the years that have promoted that, but when people leave and if the sticker doesn't get taken out, and trying to keep that updated, what we would encourage is people having a fire safety plan for their own home. That gets promoted very big in schools and that, and I've always said, if you want to see how to do a fire drill properly, go to an elementary school. You can take the teachers out of the equation and pull the fire alarm, and all the students will be lined up out in the field and accounted for. How not to do a fire drill is go to an apartment building full of adults, and we've had people call and say, this alarm's been ringing for 15 minutes, when's somebody going to shut it off? But having a workable fire safety plan, that takes into account, people's mobility issues is important. Having proper working smoke alarms, a sprinkler system would be installed in the house would be even better. To put the fire out and control it till we get there. have a couple ways out of the rooms, and that's going to be the biggest effect. And then if there is something happens, the more information you can provide on the initial call, that there is somebody in the house, there that sort of thing, then we can gear up and we can focus on getting the people out. So.
Thank you, and congratulations on 45 years. That's an exemplary, something that is very, very rare. That's going to get more and more rare as time goes by. So, good on you for being here for 45 years. Thank you for that. I have a question more of a technical nature, and it has to do with the number of calls that the fire department has to go out for medical aid type calls. You said that in the report there it talks about there was 978 calls for medical related calls, and of those 978, 488 were Delta type. What's a Delta type call as opposed to an Alpha call?
Alpha calls are I've got to cut my finger. I don't, feel good. They're the minor ones.
Okay.
Delta is more serious. It's more like trauma related calls. And I forget what all's included in that, but they're a serious but maybe not life-threatening.
Okay. That's not really. Yeah. Thank you. That's sort of what I thought. There was a hierarchy of how they work.
Yeah.
Mike, the theme of what I'm talking about is the downloading from the provincial government by the ambulance service, and if our population continues to rise in this area, which it will, and the number of ambulances are allocated is not increased, the reliance on our fire department, I would suspect, is going to go up as a result of that.
Your worship, through to Councillor Oates, there is that possibility. This year, I don't know if it's an anomaly that because our request for medical aid calls has jumped quite a bit, and our criteria has been we'll respond to echo calls, and those are typically cardiac arrests, where the ambulance crew from here, you need lots of people to do, if you're doing CPR, because we'll be doing CPR for half an hour or more, and that one person, the one ambulance crew can't do it. So we respond to those to help with the assist, and then I think about 12 of the calls were from the ambulance crews for lift assist, for if you have a larger patient to get out, and so the ambulance crew, we don't want them to get injured, so to go out there and give them a lift to get the patient down, it's probably the quickest resource for the ambulance, for us, have us go out there and help than wait for another car to come from Nanaimo or wherever. So.
Just one final comment. I've been following the events, and I think it's in Maple Ridge where their ambulances is an issue over there, and people are talking about response times of 40 and 45 minutes. So I must congratulate you on the numbers that I've seen there with your response times. They're better numbers than I've ever seen for any of the cities I've ever dealt with. So that's and given the demographics of our population here, getting to people quickly saves lives. So thank you, and I hope you never come to my place, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and once again, on behalf of Council, it's been great having you around for 45 years. You're going to be missed.
Thank you, Your Worship, and go Bruins.
And by the way, you fit right into the demographics now, so keep that in mind. Okay, members
just trying
of
to
council,
catch up to you.
The next report is report 5B, members of council, and I'm declaring a conflict of interest, and I'm turning over the chair to Councillor Oates.
Mr. Russell, could you give the background on the issue regarding the consideration of a development permit for commercial and commercial residential mixed-use development, 560 Island Highway East and 539 Stanford Avenue East, please?
Certainly, if I may, Your Worship. The subject properties that you've mentioned are located within development permit area number 3, which is the commercial and mixed-use development permit area, a designation intended to revitalize, enhance the form and character of the highway corridor, and where the scope of work permits promote energy and water conservation and reduce GHG emissions. The application before council is intended to facilitate the construction of 3 commercial buildings and 1 mixed-use commercial residential building on the subject properties. And I'm just going to bring up a quick slideshow I'm not sure how the image is reproduced in the agenda, so just so council can have a better view. So that's the parking lot. This shows the bioswale/rain garden that's mentioned in the report. In order to facilitate the bioswale rain garden, a small variance is being requested as part of the development permit to allow the parking spaces to move 0.3 meters further to the east. I'm just going to kind of flip through these ones and go to the 3D renderings, which will give you a better idea of sort of the look and feel of the project. That's it for my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Do we have any comments from council? Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would move that we give the development permit to TBBR Holdings.
So you're moving the recommendations as per the agenda, is that correct?
That's right.
Do you have a seconder for the motion? Councillor Powell. Any discussion? Councillor Greer, Councillor Beale, and Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. When was this brought forward? 2 years ago or a year ago? I just don't recall whether there's been any changes made at this time.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Greer, so the prior proposal was for a change in land use, was a rezoning proposal.
Yes.
They did show a proof of concept, which was virtually identical to this, what's being presented to Council for the development permit. There are obviously slight tweaks between the two, but it's probably the closest to being the same that I've seen in my career.
I do recall that, so I'm just wondering whether there was any major changes. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through to Mr. Russell, I just had a couple of questions. One, I was curious about choice of trees and the like. And does one look ahead at what the canopy will be like at maturity? And I'm just curious, having heard some of, pros and cons about different trees and permaculture and so on.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Beale. So the project was designed by a registered landscape architect, and that's part of their professional qualifications. Typically in the 3D renderings, they actually show you what that future canopy will look like, whereas when we go and do our initial inspection 1 year after the date, the plants are usually quite a lot smaller than what they ultimately envision, but that is taken into account through the professional.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you. Yes, because I understand that when it comes to tree canopies, bigger is better and helpful with cooling and everything else. I was also curious about, it looks like a lovely design, lovely to see the living wall. That looks like an interesting addition, and the swale. I'm curious about any impact on the intersection of Shelley Road and 19A, and I'm wondering, is there a light anticipated there, or a pedestrian control crosswalk, or anything about that consideration? I don't see that in the report.
Certainly, if I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Beale. So that was addressed at the time of rezoning about 2 years ago. As part of the development, they're basically making a contribution to a financial contribution to the traffic light as part of their community amenity package. So that part has been addressed, as well as there were traffic studies at the time, and there's other enhancements to the road infrastructure.
Thank you. Councillor Powell? Patterson? I just had a pee there.
Thank you. Not so much questions or anything to our Director of Planning. I sit on the Advisory Design Panel, so you'll see that they did have one recommendation that didn't really change a great deal, but for the most part, I just wanted to say that the Advisory Design Panel went over this quite in depth and was pleased with the rain garden and the accessibility issues and the mixed use and the general outlook of the proposed site, and it won't happen all at once, was what I gathered, but in phases, but over a shorter time period of frame. And I welcome this. It's a nice addition to the other entrance of Parksville. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. I have Patterson. Sorry. I have one question, Mr. Russell. On page 26 of your report, or of the agenda package tonight there, the third paragraph up from the bottom there, where it speaks to, in italics, where feasible, development projects should incorporate an on-site stormwater, rainwater features, in italics. And then it goes on to say that variances may be granted by council. Am I to understand that at the time when this guidelines were put into place, there was contemplation there that where such features could be incorporated, council should consider making variances to the guidelines? Is that what because that's what it looks like it is there.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Your Worship, basically where it's more of an overarching principle where a variance is being granted to better facilitate a development permit guideline. And so in this particular case, the relaxation to shift the parking is allowing for the facilitation of the bioswale rain garden feature to meet that guideline objective.
Thank you very much. Any further comments from council? If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Do we have to bring Mark back?
Mrs. Comas, just a comment for the finance staff tomorrow morning. I was sitting there waiting, looking around for some candies in the candy bowls. There are absolutely no candies left, and that's totally unacceptable. So I'd like you to send them a note tomorrow asking to leave at least some hard candies for occasions like this. Okay, we're moving on. Thank you, Councillor Oates. We're moving on to reports, and the next report is Heavy and Regular Duty Fleet Renewal. Mr. Squire, would you please give us the background on this particular topic? But before you do, I need a mover and a seconder. Do I have a mover? Councillor Powell and Councillor Beale seconding. Go ahead, Mr. Squire.
Thank you, Your Worship. On an ongoing annual basis, staff review the fleet and equipment identified for renewal in the Equipment Replacement Reserve against the current operational needs of the city. In an effort to improve versatility in equipment and support the daily operation requirements, it is important to look at all factors related to current needs of the organization, including emergency preparedness when replacing the fleet equipment. Any change in function or reallocation of vehicles or equipment identified in the current equipment replacement reserve requires council authorization. An equipment replacement reserve fund has been established in a financial plan budget to build a funding source for the ongoing renewal of all city-owned vehicles and large equipment. The following heavy-duty vehicles have been identified in the equipment replacement reserve for renewal. That is a single-axle dump truck, the tandem axle dump truck, the flat deck crane truck, and the tree chipper. After a review of operational needs and efficiencies, it has been determined that the single axle dump truck and the flat deck crane truck be replaced with a combination tandem axle dump truck, flat deck crane truck. And the tandem axle dump truck be replaced with the same, and the tree tripper be replaced with a small excavator. There are three, for the regular duty fleet, there are 3 passenger vehicles being proposed for changes, 2 smart cars and the Chrysler Sebring. These light passenger vehicles are available to all staff council to perform the daily duties, and at no single vehicle is solely assigned to individuals, so they're a shared use vehicle. Since the purchase of these vehicles, fleet needs have changed. These changes include new employees, different job assignments, and work duties. After review of staff needs, it has been determined that 2 smart cars are efficient in fuel economy, but not practical for longer trips and multiple passengers. As part of our ongoing commitment to climate action plan, staff are looking at ways and means to reduce our carbon footprint when replacing vehicles. Advancement in electrical vehicle technology has progressed slowly, and charging stations are now available in most communities. The current market for electrical and hybrid vehicles has increased, which has produced many options for customers assisted with competitive pricing. That being said, vehicles currently on the market are marginally economical viable without funding support through incentive programs through senior government and the province. Programs such as the Clean Energy Vehicle Program for BC provides up to $5,000 off the pre-tax purchase price, and the gas tax fund provided to local municipalities allows funding support for electrical vehicles. Increased public awareness of global climate change is creating a demand on such high-efficiency vehicles, which will further drive development and dealership incentives on pricing. After review of the operational needs and efficiencies for the regular duty fleet, the following has been proposed: that the Sebring be replaced with an electric/hybrid vehicle, and the 2 smart cars be replaced with 2 electric cars.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Squire from members of council? Councillor Oates.
The truck that you're going to combine and it becomes a dump truck, flat deck, crane truck, does that mean you're going to have to take the dump truck off for it to be a crane truck, or is like what's the changeover time?
Yes, through your worship. With that, it's actually reducing our heavy-duty fleet by 1. By taking the actual dump component, the sides fold down, and it becomes a flat deck, so it becomes more versatile. So we can use it not only for the snow plowing, we can use it for dumping, we can use it for a flat deck, and it also has the ability for a crane. Right now we use 2 vehicles for that, and the majority of the time, although when needed, we do need a flat deck and a crane for anything emergency. You can't rent that type of vehicle, but it's more versatile. So, yeah.
So it's a quick transition from one to the other. It's a transformer.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Any further questions for Mr. Squire? It's too bad that Mr. Shirkey left, because we're buying electric vehicles, and we're pretty pleased with that. Okay, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. So the current fleet hasn't, it still has use, I'm assuming. Like, do they get sold, or what happens to the current operational
Yes,
fleet vehicles?
through your worship. Either there's options. What we can do is there a trade-in value, or what we can do, we have to dispose of them properly if we want to sell them. So that actually goes to a provincially legislated auction. So they get auctioned off. Depending on the actual type of vehicle, there's more incentives to do one or the other.
Councillor Patterson? Okay. Have a follow-up?
Follow-up?
Sure, go ahead.
Please. So just when we're looking at the net replacement and the proposed replacement fleet costs, the current fleet value on page 68, is that what they're currently worth, or is that what the price of them was when we first bought them? And do we expect to have money come back in? So I'm just wondering, is the $560,000 the actual cost after resale value, or is that the anticipated full cost?
Yes, that is the anticipated full cost for all those vehicles, which includes the large fleet and the 3 electric vehicles. The costs in the current fleet includes the trade-in value plus the current costs that we put into the capital replacement as a result of depreciation.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. You probably know the answer to this question, but I don't. Do we have enough plug-ins for the electric vehicles?
Right now, if we did purchase it, no. The answer is, but there is plans in the work to. There's where we keep the city vehicles out in front of PCCC. There is plans to put 2 additional electric charging stations in there. Some of the electric vehicles that we're looking at can plug directly into a 120 outlet. They have a converter. Yeah. So that we could do that at the refuge container out there. There's abilities to do that in the interim. Yeah.
Any more questions for Mr. Squire from members of council? Just following up on Councillor Powell's question, is there leaving them where their cars are now? Is there any security issues that you'll have to deal with regards to leaving the charging stations on?
It'd be no different than the one just over here, other than it has more of a street appearance and it's in a lighted area. We haven't had any vandalism to any of those vehicles. As a precaution, in years past, what we do, if Halloween falls over a weekend, we'll take those vehicles back to Public Works and put them in a compound. But other than that, we haven't had any issues either with this electronic charging station as well.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, Council, are we ready to vote? All those in favor of the recommendations, the 4 recommendations? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried unanimously. The next item is also you, Mr. Squire. I need a mover and a seconder for the Water Service System Bylaw 1320 Region-Wide Watering Restriction Framework. Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Patterson. Okay, Mr. Squire, it's over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. When drought conditions last year began impacting water supplies in the city and throughout the region, communities became difficult because of the levels or stages were defined differently in each service area, creating confusion for some of the residents. For an example, if you have a resident driving from, say, Deep Bay through Qualicum, Parksville, Nanoose, and into Nanaimo, you had different levels or stages of water conservation. And we certainly heard it. There was a lot of confusion. And then to add on that, there was also the provincial drought level, which had no relation to our water conservation level 4, but it was based on drought. So there was confusion, although having the drought level correspond with our water conservation level certainly created for us a big awareness. So with that, as a result, the RDN board, as you know, directed their staff to work with member municipalities and other water purveyors to review standard regional drought communication protocols and water restriction policies in an effort to streamline communications to the public. Staff from the major water purveyors met to discuss several times, challenging the opportunities for alignment and reviewing possibilities for standardized water restriction. In other words, what we're looking at, stage 1, 2, 3, 4 would mean the same thing across the region. Right now, what we call it is water conservation, what we're looking at, and we have 4 different levels. They're looking for something, again, it would be 4 levels, and I'll show you that in an upcoming slide, but they would be called stages, and they would be water restriction, not conservation. To reach this agreement, it was acknowledged that not all water systems need to be the same stage at the same time, as long as the stages were defined consistently. This approach recognizes different systems will have different water supply concerns due to varying sources, yet allows for consistency in the stage definitions to aid with communications. This alignment of watering restriction policies will help avoid confusion among residents and assist staff in communicating to customers. Water restrictions are an important tool to curb water usage when water suppliers are stressed by dry conditions. And I'll just show you our current conditions to give you a bit of a background. As mentioned before, we have water conservation levels. There's 4 of them. Level 1 is April, September, and October. The only difference between level 1 and 3 is the total allocated watering hours per day. Previous to this, we did look at reducing it to 2 times a week or once a week. This caused a lot of confusion to the public because they had to either get somebody to reprogram their irrigation controller, or they never knew what it was. It was odd or even, or what day it was. To further complicate that, we do have very large municipal strata developments that can't adhere to some of these watering times. And with that, for instance, Craig Bay, they typically annually get, because they physically cannot do the watering within that allotted time, so they get they come in for a permit or an exemption for this. Level 2, we typically start implementing in May, June, July, and the watering goes to 4 hours, and then level 3. What we found is level 3 doesn't make any difference, and especially last year it was certainly a lot of proof. This is a graph of a typical water consumption in a year from January all the way to December. The red line represents our historical 4-year average up until 2014. And as you can see, in May is when it's a critical time, and especially the May long weekend's a critical time, is when we really start seeing the outdoor water usage. People are out there gardening. We do get the influx of visitors coming to the community, which does add to water consumption. But typically May is the end of May is our critical point where we can start seeing the ramping up. Our winter rates, our base rates is what we call it. You can see in our peak summer demands, it's almost 4 to 5 times higher. So we started level 2 last year, just at the end of April, because we're a little bit premature. Obviously, you can see our normal pattern is in the red. Well, we're almost a month and a half ahead of that. Last year, we saw the really drying period, and people were certainly out there using more water. So at the end of April, they were using it. So we started level 2 early, and then we went into level 3 at the end of May. And you can see when we started level 3, you can certainly see the water demand. It didn't make a difference. Prior to this, the provincial drought level, it actually, some of the communication got out there, and we started seeing the public respond to that, saying prior to us going to level 4. So it was partly due to some of our media releases and the province going to level 4 as well. You could see a dramatic drop in consumption, almost 30-40% right away by the total watering ban. And essentially what that level 4 does is focus on the lawns. on the irrigation of the lawns. And that's what our patrols were doing, is looking at the lawns. So right there, it was good proof to see, and it did work. It certainly helped us, our abilities to help convey water and allow us to have sufficient water storage in our above-ground reservoirs for fire, such as the threat of a wildfire into our community. So with that, that was using our existing levels and also our communication, but we didn't find that level 3 really helped us in any means, so that was some of the input that we gave all the other communities with that. What we're looking at now is, again, going with the 4 different levels, but now we're calling them stages, and it's not water conservation, it's water restriction stages. So the level 1, and I do want to point out in my report there is an error in level 1. I call it in the effective date. It says October-April, which you can come to mean that's between October to April, but it's actually just the months of October and April. And if the bylaw does pass, we'll correct that in the bylaw readings. So with stage 1, it would be effective in October and April, and you can water between, the frequency is any day, and you can sprinkler times would between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. Level stage 2, pardon me, would be between...
Mr. Greer has a...
Yes.
Thank you. I'm just questioning the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I've had, I don't know how many calls on that.
Yeah.
Because it only works for somebody that would have sprinkler systems, probably.
It is, and what that does, because we want to create the regional consistency, what that is level 1 is essentially Qualicum Beaches, what they use. That's not sufficient for our summer. They use that year-round, the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. What we found in the following slide will show it. What we found is in the shouldering seasons, the shouldering months, in April and October, our water demand is very low. There's not a lot of outdoor usage for that. Even last year, you can see there is very little water demand until May. May is our critical month. April, there's sufficient precipitation. We get over 2 inches in April, and I believe over 3 inches on average in October. So it's not a big concern for us, and the proof is here in our water supply. Our residents aren't demanding that. It's just for the... And if a user does have any hardship, there is certainly a process to come and fill out an application and get an exemption for those months if they so do wish. Level 2 would start May, June, July, August, September, so that's right in the core of those peak summer months, and that would allow for the even odd, and they would be allowed between the hours of 7 to 10 a.m. for a maximum of 2 hours, and they would also be allowed between 7 and 10 p.m. Now, the difference is level 3, and this is what Nanaimo experienced last year. They didn't go vary from their level 2. What they did was produce basically an ad campaign, basically asking for the residents' help. So this is a precursor to go into level 4. Stage 4. This is asking voluntary water use regulations on your lawn and garden. And what we did find is the people with green lawns stood out. And that's what Nanaimo also found. They kind of essentially get shunned from the general public, and we're all in this together, and it's all our water. And it's, so it's a bit of a precursor saying, look, we're going to level 2 is applicable, but we were asking the public to volunteer watering restrictions on their lawn. And then, of course, stage 4 would be a total watering ban, which is very similar to what we had this year. So this would, again, in summary, this would be a consistent regional-wide right from Qualicum to the city of Nanaimo would have these same consistent water regulations. Even though in our summer we may be on 2 or 3, but our neighboring community, depends on their water situation, may be on a different stage.
I got a number of questions regarding the different levels. I spent my summer when we implemented level 4 saying, how come so-and-so's at level 3, or how come so-and-so's at level whatever, and this is a discussion we had at the RDN, and it's good to see the change. Further questions for Mr. Squire? Councillor Oates.
So with that change in stage 1 being effective April and October, then the months of November, December, January, February, and March, free for all. So if you could wash your vehicle, boat, the house, you wouldn't be required to have a hose with a shutoff device.
Through your worship, it is silent on that. Those aren't the months that we're targeting. The winter water use is very minimal, and it's very manageable, and it's not unsustainable for our water system. So come April to October, the shouldering months, April and October, the critical months is when we're exceeding our winter-based demands by 4 times in the summer, is when we have a problem with our water supply that is compromising our emergency water storage.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Obviously, we got lots of water at this time of year because it's done nothing but rain and, of course, snow in the mountains. Last year was an exception because of the drought for 4 months, and then also the fact that we didn't have any snow and very little rain. So, and we survived okay. So I guess what I'm saying is this year, unless we get into a severe drought again, which is maybe doubtful, and we could possibly do that, we should be in pretty good shape for this summer as we stand right now.
He's asking you.
I mean, we got a mountain full of snow, and we've had lots of rain.
Yeah.
The year before, we had no snow, you know.
Yeah, there was no snowpack last year, and at this time of year, we didn't have a full reservoir. So that's the difference right now. Is this year our reservoir has been full. It has been for the last 3 weeks, and we do have a snowpack. Although the last couple weeks we've seen 2-3 feet go down to at least less than a foot right now. So it's still just below average for snowpack this year.
Of course, the other question we get all the time, every year, at this time of year when it's raining so much, is like, why don't we put storage in? You know, where is our storage at? When are we going to start? You know, so those questions come on a daily basis, and I don't know whether you can answer any of those yet.
Yes, certainly. We were fortunate enough to have the forethought in the middle of the 90s when we built the Aerosmith Dam. So it is our storage, and it provides us and it holds water for the summer months. We don't, on an annual basis, we don't have on the east coast of Vancouver Island, there's no water shortage. There is a difficulty in getting water to supply those peak demands for a very small system like ours. To build in those exuberant amounts of peak storage volumes for those days is costly.
Thank you.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. And thank you, Mr. Squires, for the clarification. It's really very helpful, and the October and April. Also, just, it'll take a little practice, I think, for myself as well, getting used to the changes in terminology and the different stages. I do think that sometimes when people hear that stage 4 is a total watering ban, they think the worst when in fact it isn't, because if you look carefully, as you know, of course, that there is hand watering for vegetables and the like. So I just think that all along that, it's really helpful to really understand the document and what's intended should we pass this, because even with the October and April, and I know that there have been queries about that, it's only referring to sprinkling times, those sorts of things. And again, if somebody's hand watering because they've planted some vegetables, that in fact can be done any time, but advised to water in the early morning or in the evening. So there's lots of room for your general garden variety gardener, I suppose. So thank you very much.
I just wanted to suggest to Mr. Squire, when you get future questions about long-term weather forecasts from Councillor Greer, that you might want to quote the fact that Puxatawney Phil is the authority for the whether there's going to be a six more weeks of, so you can answer that, if we follow the Puxatawney Phil on water, we're going to be okay. I read that in an editorial the other day that people assiduously follow Puxatawney Phil and his predictions. Okay, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of the three recommendations? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Thank you, Mr. Squire. Okay, under Bylaws Council, we have three readings this evening. I'm going to ask for first of all, a mover and a seconder. Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Beale. And the recommendation is that the Water Service System Amendment Bylaw 2016, number 1320-27, be read three times. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. We have a bylaw for final adoption. I have a mover and a seconder before I read the bylaw. Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Greer. The recommendation is that the Sanitary and Storm Sewage System Amendment Bylaw 2016, number 1319.12, Water Service System Amendment Bylaw 2016, number 1320.26, Sewer Parcel Tax Amendment Bylaw 2016, number 1493.3, and Sewer Parcel Tax Amendment Bylaw 2016, number 1493.3, be reconsidered and finally adopted, signed by the Mayor and Corporate Officer, and the corporate seal affixed thereto. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. And now, Council, finally, we're moving on to new business. Does any member of Council have any new business? Looking around the table, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. Just bringing forward at the beginning of your council, I had a resolution of the Access Oceanside Association that I'll be bringing forward a notice of motion to ask for council support for the resolution. And also in the Access Oceanside Association, there was a grant that was awarded to the accessibility group that the city holds. And so at this point in time, I'd like to ask for the mayor and myself to forward $2,000 to the Access Oceanside Association in regards to, for the program coordinator to work with, working forward some of the website and accessibility pamphlets and a few other items that require some funding from that grant.
This is an amount required over and above the grant that they got.
Yes.
Because it's just more money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, we hold the money in the cities, so in our
I'm afraid, Your Worship, that I don't have any idea about what we're holding for the Oceanside access, but if Council will like, we will certainly look into it next week and provide information to Council on it.
It is $18,000. That was a grant from the provincial Minister Stillwell's ministry, as a matter of fact. Yeah, okay.
So at this point in time, they're requesting $2,000 from that funding.
I don't know if do you need a council resolution for that?
I'm not sure, but I wanted to bring it forward that's.
I think He's accountable for the money.
If it is grant funds that the city is holding on their behalf and we already have them in place and they're just asking for withdrawal of the $2,000, then no, we don't need a council resolution to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Okay, any further items? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. This is something that's been dear to my heart for a long time, but tonight I'm finally going to bring it up. I know that staff has worked very closely with Bolinas in the past on building the park, and it was with the student council. And so what I would like to do is have staff work with the Bolinas Student Council and I would like to have a representative of the youth in this community sit at the council table, not as a voting member, but as somebody that can put forward their ideas. It's to get us connected to the youth in the community at one level. And so I would like staff to come back with a report about the feasibility, if the student council or members of the student council are willing to sit at council. Like, I think there's a bunch of questions that need to be asked, and this is just a notice of motion. So this will be coming forward in a couple weeks.
And I'm sure that staff will be probably discussing with the school board. Yeah, okay. That's good. Okay, thank you. I just want to remind everybody, I'm sorry, I just want to say something before Councillor Salter regrets not being able here tonight. She's not well. But she did ask me to remind everybody, and I think we're going to have some posters up in the building by tomorrow or the next day. The Brant Festival is coming up, and support for that, especially support in terms of keeping dogs away from the beach when the Brant are visiting us before they move on. I just thought I'd bring that up on Councillor Salter's behalf. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just in regards to Councillor Powell's request, that the Civic Actions class, which I sit as a liaison, will be meeting on that again next month. So they have expressed some interest in that. So I can help you follow up with that as well.
And also, I'd like to thank Councillor Powell for going to the RDN board meetings in my absence. I know you enjoyed that thoroughly, didn't you? Okay. And that's nothing further under new business, Council. So we're going to, yes, Councillor Oates?
Yes, I have a motion, Your Worship, with respect to for a special council meeting for the Jensen extension of the traffic flow study. And the motion is that a special meeting of council be held on Monday, March 14th, 2016 at 6 p.m. at the Forum in the Parksville Civic and Technology Center located at 100 Jensen Avenue East, Parksville, BC, to receive a presentation from Boulevard Traffic Consultants regarding the proposed Jensen extension and traffic flow in the downtown area.
Okay.
I think it's this group, I understand, have been looking for an opportunity for us to hear their presentation. I understand that the proposed date is convenient to the majority of council, so I think we should support having this meeting.
Okay, 6 p.m. on the 14th here. And everyone's invited. Okay. I was going there, slow but sure. Okay, takes a while. All right, we're going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That's unanimous. All right, thank you. Yes, now we have a motion. I need a mover and a seconder. Do I have a mover and a seconder for this next motion? Councillor Greer and Councillor Veal. Pursuant to Section 91E of the Community Charter, Council proceed to a closed meeting to consider an item related to land. All those in favor? Thank you. That's carried. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back